The first of the Trump trade deals has been signed. It's between the UK and the USA, and both sides are saying it's a big deal. But who really is the winner? I've been talking to a Nobel-prize winner, no less, about the UK-USA deal and the future of the tariff trade deals. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Professor Joseph Stiglitz, welcome to Americast.
Nice to be here.
Very nice to see you face to face in what we call the worldwide headquarters of Americast, although it's not in the States, it's in London for technical reasons. Look, let's start with the kind of broad brush of what is going on at the moment, because there is so much. Obviously, the tariffs are a huge deal. We've just got this agreement now between the UK government and the US government over the top. It's the first of them. From what you've seen of it, what do you make of it?
From what I've seen of it, the UK did make a mistake. Trump's original agenda was to divide and conquer and go after the weaker countries first, set a pattern of they're giving in more than they got. China took quite the opposite stance. It said, we're not going to kowtow to the United States. We're going to retaliate. We're going to raise tariffs. We have, and China has, minerals and natural resources, production capacities, supply capacities that the U.S. needs. The cards are in China's hands. And so China retaliated, and they're now just beginning the negotiations. The UK ran to the table and got an agreement of the kind that you might expect. It got some things in, like some cars in duty-free. Key issues are unresolved. Will they put tariffs on pharmaceuticals? Will they put tariffs on movies? And what it seems to be the case, the U.S. will continue to put enormous pressure on some of the major sources of revenue for the UK in the future, like the digital taxes.
Did the UK have a choice, though?
Yes. It could have joined Europe in negotiating on behalf of all of Europe. Just because you left the EU doesn't mean that you can't work together with the EU.
Yeah, but we would have had immediate 27% effectively tariffs on our car industry, and particularly the higher-end cars, the big value cars that we send to America. I think what the British government would say if they were here, and particularly if they were talking to you privately, they'd say, look, Joseph, there's nothing we could do. We were in it desperately. We didn't have the cards, to use the Trump phrase.
I think, as I said, Trump's strategy was divide and conquer, and he did divide and conquer in the case of the UK. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the world as a whole, the world as a whole should know that the multilateral trade deficit is not determined by these little negotiations that are going on, but by macroeconomics. There are adjustments of exchange rates that go on that offset the tariffs, and the magnitude of the multilateral trade deficit is going to be determined by the disparity between America's total aggregate savings rate and its total aggregate investment rate. And with Trump proposing to have unfunded tax cuts for the very rich, or at least many of the rich, that trade deficit, multilateral, is going to go up. Exchange rates will adjust, and they will undo some of the effects of the tariffs.
Right.
So I would have stuck with the big picture.
Whatever the short-term pain, stick with
whatever
the big picture, because the outside world eventually together wins, is your point.
That's right. That's what the data said, and that's what happened in 2017. You know, he didn't lower. In his first term, the trade deficit didn't go down for all that blustering. This is all blustering Uh, the, there are two things one should know about Trump, more than two, of course. One, he loves to bluster and he loves to bully. And the second one is he knows no economics. And you put those two together, you use your economics and you do a little blustering back.
Does the politics of this, or at least the economic effect in the United States, eventually affect the politics, do you think, to an extent that he has to reverse?
American politics under Trump at this moment is a kind of politics we've never had because he controls the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. He doesn't control all of them with enormous strength. He has to cobble together a majority, and we never know whether it's going to break apart. And some of the things that he does are so illegal that even a Republican-controlled Supreme Court will rule against him. But the economics normally would say this is going to raise prices. Americans are very concerned with prices, the leftover of the pandemic, and it's going to slow economic growth. Now, that's the worst of all possible worlds, stagflation. And on top of that, there's going to be threats to Medicare, Medicaid, all kinds of government programs.
These are the medical programs for poor and disabled people and for elderly people.
And he
hugely important to millions and millions of Americans.
And we've been having more and more natural disasters because of climate change, which he denies. And he wants now to cut out the one government agency to deal with emergencies, FEMA.
But I suppose the question that Americast listeners are really interested in, and we're all interested in, is how soon does the rubber hit the road? So at the moment, we've got a lack of container ships arriving at the big ports, you think of Los Angeles, Seattle, etc. That we've been talking on the podcast before about how that has an immediate impact in as much as the trucks that pick up the stuff and take it to Walmart, all of that's going to go. The truckers themselves, in many cases, self-employed people, lose their jobs, they don't spend money, etc., etc. All this sort of economic cycle that you know better than anyone. But I suppose the interesting thing is the timing. Do we feel in the summer? Does he begin to feel in the summer? Do individual Americans in the summer begin to say, hang on a second, what's happened?
They're already feeling it. They're already seeing it coming. But I think you're right. It's going to be several months before the full impact. These economic processes act with a lag, because particularly right now, because nobody knows. The businesses don't know now to raise the price or wait until the shortages actually show up. I can tell you that when the shortages show up, it's more likely that there may be significant price increases. The basis of that is what happened in 2020, 21, 22, when we, aftermath of the pandemic, the firms recognized the supply chains problems, recognized that the competition was much lower. And they took advantage of that. And so there was some of what was called greedflation. They said, we're just responding to market forces. But the market forces were, there's no competition. And when there's no competition, what do those market forces tell you to do?
Yeah, but I can remember then the Biden administration going for the corporations and going for the companies and saying, this is you. And you can see Trump doing the same thing, can't you, this time around?
He can do it, but it didn't have much effect under Biden. And I'm not sure it's going to have that much effect.
People see through it, is what you're saying, whatever administration.
And they'll just say, I'm sorry, I'd like to pay attention to you, but these are my costs. And it goes up a little bit at a time, and it does go, seep through the economic system. And this time, there's even more uncertainty. So many dimensions, trade partners all over the world are being affected. It's not just a narrow band of places where there is a problem. So we don't know, partly because he could go into reverse gear at any moment. Not likely, but he loves tariffs. He loves negotiations. He's undermining the international rule of law, and that's another dimension we haven't fully taken into account.
But if he
the
does,
British agreement is in violation of international law, and that's not something Britain should be proud of.
in what respect?
Well, a basic principle of international economic law, long-standing, is the most favored nation principle. The most favored nation principle is that whatever deal you do with one country, you give that to every other country. You don't do special deals. And you can only do a special deal when it's part of a free trade arrangement. But we're not in a free trade arrangement with the UK. It's a very specific, it's a worst form of managed trade agreement. So what Britain has done is, in spirit, and I think almost surely in the letter of the law, in violation of the WTO.
It's also, of course, a personal deal, as it were, with Trump. And you saw Keir Starmer and Donald Trump on their joint press conferences on other sides of the Atlantic. And you do think, don't you, given that all we know about Donald Trump, and his friends would say this as well, he is quite mercurial. I mean, it could all be torn up, couldn't it?
Yes, and he doesn't believe in the rule of law. He's not like a normal political leader. He signed the agreement between Canada and Mexico just in his first term. And what was his first act? Tear it up and say, I'm going to impose these very large tariffs on Canada. So an agreement with Donald Trump isn't worth the paper it's written on.
Has he won the deal that he signed with Britain? I mean, for him, for the US, because Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, had this chart, didn't he, in the Oval Office, which showed very clearly tariffs on Britain going up and tariffs that Britain imposes on the United States going down.
I think from that narrow point of view, the U.S. won. Starmer lost. From the global point of view, I think the world lost. Because we've tried to create for 80 years since World War II a global international economic order, which is not marked by this kind of power. It's marked by a set of rules, international rules, and that's where the most favored nation principle comes in. It's been the fundamental principle of international commerce, and it's been torn up like everything else that Donald Trump does. He destroys norms, due process, the bases of creating a civilized society.
Except that a lot of people who support Donald Trump, including people in the economics profession who support him, and there are some, say, you know what, that whole system that you revere so much, in the end let down swathes of people, let them down across the industrialized world, but particularly let them down in the United States. And actually, in a sense, the things that he is trying to do, if he succeeded in doing them, would reverse a great wrong that has taken place.
There's such irony in what you just said. First of all, the United States wrote most of those rules with Europe.
But it screwed its own people. That's the point, isn't it?
It was American corporations, American financial institutions that wrote those rules. And there's a kind of irony that now that the United States wrote those rules saying they were unfair to us, they weren't designed to be unfair to the United States. They were designed to be unfair to the developing countries, emerging markets. I wrote a lot about that when I was Chief Economist of the World Bank. I saw that they discriminated against the poor in favor of the United States. And now for the United States to come and say those laws were written by the United States against the United States, does that have any credibility? I say zero credibility. Now, what is true is they were written by big corporations, big finance, without real concerns of the interest of the workers. Now, when I was, again, a member of the Clinton administration, we tried to do something to help the workers. And it was the Republicans who came in and said, no, 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 no help for the workers. We believe in, the ruggedness of the
Yeah, they
marketplace.
got to learn to code.
They have to learn to cope with this new world, a kind of Darwinian survival. It'll all make them better. I thought, nonsense. And I was really worried that this trade liberalization, without those protections, was going to have precisely the effects that it has had. The Republicans couldn't care less. And now you have these Republicans suddenly opening up their hearts for the people that they have hurt for 40 years and saying, oh, they took advantage of us.
It's really odd, isn't it, that when you look back to the Seattle riots when the World Trade Organization was meeting in Seattle, when it was at the end of the last 1999, and it was a left-wing thing, and you had left-wing protesters and all the rest of it. And as you say, there were plenty on the left who were saying these things are going to happen. I mean, realistically, could America have done more as a nation, as a society, to try to see what was happening in the Rust Belt, but also more widely as well, and to address it? So in a sense, the whole world, could you argue the whole world is now paying the price for America itself not noticing those things that you say you noticed in those years?
I think we are paying a high price, and we could have done much, much more. In the Clinton administration, I wasn't alone. Bob Reich was the Secretary of Labor. We had looked at the data about growing inequality. It still was nowhere near what it is today, but we saw the trends that were coming up. We understood the underlying economic forces and where they were likely to lead. We knew the difficulties of making an economic transformation. You don't just convert somebody who's been a steel worker or a coal worker into a software worker overnight. So these were going to be difficult transitions for human capital, but also location, where the jobs are that were being created were different from the jobs that were being destroyed. And so that's why we called for strong assistance to make trade adjustment assistance for those needing help in making the technological changes, transformations that were going on. But our voices weren't heard, and
the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Let's bring it bang up to date again now. So you mentioned earlier that the China talks, hugely important China talks that are about to take place, and this kind of sense that now China is the key to this, and China has been holding back from taking part in talks, from giving anything, and has, as you put it, quite a lot of the cards. How does that end? What do you think happens now?
I think it's inconceivable that China will kowtow to the United States in some ways that UK has done. Anybody who understands the history of China remembers, I can't remember personally, but from reading history, the Opium Wars, it's not conceivable within the politics of China. China holds the cards in a number of ways. The things that China has, we can't get anywhere else, like rare earths and minerals. Some of the things that China produces, we could eventually produce, but it would be very difficult and take years and years. China's has more engineers, better trained, better logistics systems, supply chains, all of which makes modern manufacturing, much easier. So it's not just a matter of prices. We may not have the key skills that are necessary to do that manufacturing, at least quickly. So on the supply side, we are at a disadvantage. And then on the demand side, what we threaten to China is we won't be able to sell, China won't be able to sell its goods to the United States. The fact of the matter is that the United States is only 20% of the global GDP. And China recently has shown that it can expand its production domestically and abroad. And it has an enormous capacity to increase domestic aggregate demand. It's relatively low. I've been telling it ought to be increasing. It would make it the people in China better off.
Right. So all these products that don't go to the States, don't turn up in Walmart, will be bought by Chinese people,
And
or perhaps come to Europe or this country.
They're sitting on $2 trillion of reserves, more than $2 trillion. They can use that to stimulate their economy. And
if they're in that strong a position, though, I go back to the question: what happens? I mean, does Trump stand down? How would it end?
He stood down over and over again. Liberation Day was a long time ago, and tariffs went up, and they went down, and they went up, and they went down, they went up, and went down. One of the great advantages of being such a blusterer that everybody is sort of shell-shocked. They don't remember, was it up or down last week? And so they won't remember now, is he going down for up or up and down? And they won't remember whether it's a concession or victory. We know he will declare victory. That we know. But that doesn't mean anything to anybody anymore.
We also know that all of this is supremely unpredictable. It's really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming into the Americast studio. Joseph Stiglitz, thank you. That's it for this edition. All past editions, of course, available on BBC Sounds. See you all later. Bye-bye.